Brian has had an impressive career. He's been there at Oakley for a number of decades now, and he's been the heart and soul of the brand. So, ladies and gentlemen, Brian Takumi.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for everyone coming tonight. Nice, kind words from Mark. I'm super happy to be here. Interesting story I've had, but at the same time, I don't think you guys came to listen to me speak about my life. This is probably more about Oakley and how we've brought it together. So through the history of Oakley, there's a lot of things that go on. My role, as you mentioned, is actually brand soul. So what does that mean? It's really about how do you portray what the brand is? How do you define it? How do you build a foundation for it? Because I think we all live in spaces. Nikki was talking about briefings, and I'm sure a lot of you, if you're from agencies or you do school work, you talk about it and you go, well, what makes this whatever? And you go, it's cool, or I love it, or like, this is my expression. But it's like, what does that actually mean? And how do you do that as a brand? So when I start to talk about it, I don't have a sizzle reel like Nikki. I brought children's books. So if you've ever been stuck in your life, in your career, I'm actually going to use this. How many of you have actually heard of this before? What you do matters. So that's what I'm kind of framing this up of. What you do matters. What I do matters. What I do as a brand matters. What the brand does matter. And how do you actually start to portray that? So if you've never read this, get the box set. The first one was What Do You Do with a Chance? But really, or what do you do with an idea? But it's really interesting to use it as inspiration. So as I said, you guys aren't here to see me. You're here to talk about Oakley, but I will give you a little glimpse into my life. So my journey starts with what do you do with a chance? So growing up, here's little Brian Takumi riding his bike. And it was super interesting because it's like, I love bikes. I saw this really cool movie in 1986 called Rad. These guys doing tricks on bikes, and I was like, wow, riding bikes is really cool and it could be fun and things like that. And it was the first time, like for me, I was going into art. I actually kind of became good at it, not to the point of competing or things like that, but I was doing shows. But I grew up with the brand. I knew Oakley. I was a Southern California kid. Freestyle BMX was born here in Southern California. Jim Gennard, who was the founder of Oakley, used to come to our shop and things like that. You see me here in my old Oakley thermonuclear protection that all you young kids who've been are younger than how long I've been at Oakley, like, where do you find those old t-shirts? It's like, yeah, I actually wore that. I had one. But it starts to get into, as I started to develop, super interesting as Nikki was talking about finding graphic design. My parents were very much like, do what you love, make sure you're making money at it and you're not living at home, but make sure you do what you love. So I was like, yeah, I love painting. I loved art. I learned how to screen print when I was a kid. My mom taught me how to sew. I was making apparel and things like that. And it's like, yeah, none of this is going to pay the bills. So as a kid growing up, in Southern California, we had beach volleyball, motocross, surfing, all these things going on. But man, when you would flip through those magazines back in the day, you would get to those Oakley ads and you would go, man, those Oakley ads are different. They're not like ads with a headline. They were very advertorial. They were like art pieces. You go, I would tear these things out and hang them up on my wall. And I would go like, man, I would love to work there one day. That place seems cool. And all they do is put pretty photos in there. This would be the easiest job ever. Just put photos in there. But as it started to evolve, it's like started to learn more about it. And then I was like, had the opportunity. I was working at a marketing and promotions firm, had clients like Purina and Black & Decker and Miller Brewing and P&G. And I was like doing graphics. And I'm like, oh, cool, I'm doing graphics. And I'm like, I freaking hate my job. I'm doing things that I'm not passionate about at all. I would sit there and count down the time, like my timer right here going like, hurry up and speed up. But just go like, man, I want to do something like I'm passionate about. So then Brian Takumi grew up and I got a job at Oakley. And now it was like, what am I going to do there? And so I'll go through this really quick because we're already burned 3 minutes. But like I was doing traditional graphic design, like brochures, catalogs, annual reports. How many kids even here know what an annual report is? These things, agencies used to get paid $1 billion to make these things. But then also doing like surface graphic design. This was very different back in the day. This is an image. I was talking to someone about this earlier. It's like, oh yeah, that chrome skull and, we just saw what Nikki and the team does and CGI and Unreal Engine now, things like that. My background in having my fine art background, which I will encourage any of you in graphic design to learn your fine arts. This thing is done in 1990 8 in Photoshop with a Wacom pen. There's no CGI here. This thing was painted by me by hand on the computer. As Nikki said, like AI, computer's just a tool. It's what you do with it. These images here, like I made this stuff from scratch in Photoshop. But it's what led to growing beyond that of creating something more meaningful from it. How do you create art? And then how do you remove that subjectivity of it? It's like, oh yeah, this is my art, so I want it to be cool. But how do you actually determine what makes it Oakley? So then eventually I became the head of apparel design, soft goods, things like that. I was doing all these different things, but I was getting into different materials. So now actually CMF, which my creative director, Brian Dorse on CMF is here now. I was overseeing a lot of my passion was more product than doing graphic design. So putting surface, colors, material finish, things that went on the product. And then it eventually grew to brand design. And so then it was driving the direction of the brand. This was a much different thing than executing graphics to where I could actually bring my art to life in this. I would do the inspiration for seasonal things, but I would get the paint, set the mood and tone and things like that. But really combine my passion, my skill set, but doing it in a way I got paid also, so I wasn't living at home. But as this started to evolve, it became, how do you define the brand? So this is where what do you do with a problem comes in. If you know about Oakley, it is owned by EssilorLuxottica, which is one of the biggest eyewear companies in the world. We are no longer a company, we are a brand in a portfolio. So we work in a very matrix organization. So Nikki was talking about the acquisition and Activision and Blizzard and what that meant with Microsoft. We've gone to a place where we're fully integrated into the Luxottica organization. So think about that and you think about like, oh, this is my art. Now you're having to deal with a matrix organization where we don't have an internal creative group anymore. You are having to set the mood and tone for 280,000 people who may touch the brand or comment on the brand at any time. And how do you align them to understand what makes it Oakley? Because you can't just do it by going, oh, this is cool. Or I'm sure you guys, don't ever live in an agency like this or a world where, a boss is going, I'll know it when I see it. Worst thing you could ever go through. The reason I learned and challenged myself to define this is because our founder and our boss was like, I'll know it when I see it. And you can't live that way. And certainly in the, Nikki's talking about pumping things out. You can't be efficient that way. So I started to think about how do you do this? So our boss in Milan said, you need the secret recipe for Oakley. How are you going to do that? And I said, I don't know, but I better figure this out. Because when you start to think about it, these are all words I've heard said about Oakley. People who work there, people who comment it, they're like, oh, it's cool, it's sporty, it's metal, it's winners, it's different, it's sunglasses, fast like that. Nowhere in the history of Oakley has that ever been said. So when you think about it and you say, I sit in design reviews all the time and I hear someone say, what makes this Oakley? And I'll hear them say, they'll go, oh, this is totally the Oakley DNA. And I'll go, what does that actually mean? And they're like, oh, it's like fast. And I'm like, where have you ever seen that written? Like, well, I haven't. It's like, okay, so that's your personal point of view of what you think Oakley design is, but that's never been documented. So how do you put some objectivity to that? So when you put it in the context of cooking, there's like this kid right here. Do you want to eat what he makes, or do you want to have a chef make it? And so you can have a recipe, but at the end of the day, you can have a recipe, you can have the best ingredients in the world, but if you make it really bad, do you really want to eat it? And that's the same thing when you talk about brand. So how do we put it together? There's this book called Primal Branding by Patrick Hanlon. There's a few other books about it. Patrick's amazing because he actually writes about brands in the context of cultures and tribes. So when you start to think about it, he actually started to build this on how the social code of what goes with it and studied it a lot. And he broke this down to, there's an origin story, a creed, icons, rituals, temples, the lexicon, leaders, non-believers, and said if you use these things, this is how tribes get created. This is how cults get created. This is also how lots of movements get created. You see this, and he said, you can apply this to brands. So the example I use on this, drop some in, Apple, everyone, how many people think different is Apple's philosophy? Yeah, it's a trick question. Usually people always go, yeah, think different, that's Apple. And it's like, that's their motto, that's their advertising slogan or campaign that came out. How do you understand what drove that? So the important one on this is the creeds, the thought process behind it. If you actually go back and study the Apple, you'll find this written. Understand and serve the customer better than anyone. Forget about everything else, and always and everywhere. So when you start to think about what drives iPad, the cloud, Apple TV, all these things, the world coming together. These are the things that drove the world for Apple to think different. These are the things you should be using as the foundation to drive decisions as a brand. Not think different. That's the outcome. So how do you start to use these tools? Starbucks is the one I love using because we're owned by an Italian company. The origin story, if you all know, is inspired by Italian cafes. And then you talk about things like the lexicon. I mean, they're genius on this. Venti, grande, tall. I need a non-fat vanilla latte with double shot. And then what happens? You go to your local coffee shop and ask for that, and they go, we don't serve that here. Why is that? Because that's language developed by Starbucks that has grown to create this community of Starbucks believers. And non-believers is an important one here because it's what we're not. And it's super interesting to use Starbucks. We've got some of our Italian expats here. And it's super interesting. Who are the biggest non-believers of Starbucks, even though it's inspired by Italian cafes? Italians. This is not real coffee. But in here, we love Starbucks. But it's those ideas that start to build that tribe. So Oakley, if you don't know the story, it's born from a motorcycle distributor. It wasn't even a brand. You can go through all these, and we've developed all these things along the way. But the origin story of us is the beginning. How many people here know where the name Oakley came from? I know some people do. This is Oakley Ann right here, named after Jim's dog, English setter. But there's a point of that is there was always storytelling. Storytelling's key to the brand, whether that was in brand, product, marketing, all those things come together. And I like that. Did Oakley start out as a business or brand? And people go, oh, it's a brand. But if you don't know this, look at that catalog behind it. Oakley products. There's a single Oakley logo in there. That's because Oakley started out as a business. It was a motorcycle distributor. That's what he was selling, other people motorcycle parts. And you start to think about it like, if it was about the money, he never needed to start Oakley, the brand. He could have just kept selling more motorcycle parts. So the grip, how many people know Oakley started out as a grip company? Very little. That's what he started doing. But there's a belief we like to talk about, everything in the world can and will become better. It's just a matter of when and by whom. So he was selling other people's motorcycle parts. He had this idea with a grip that had this cam shape for better leverage, anatomical shape for it, made out of this material called unobtainium that becomes more tacky when you sweat. It had this octopus pattern on it. So he went to the motorcycle companies and said, hey, I have this new idea for a grip. They said, shut up and sell. That's not your job to tell us what to do. So he went and started Oakley, the brand. He's going, I'm going to make my own stuff. And so when you start to think about it, then he went into goggles. And where did eyewear come from? So goggles cover your face. And so here, we got PCH right in front of us. If you know this, you live here, you drive on PCH. Jim was here in Southern California. When the sun sets and you're driving there, the sun gets low in the water, it reflects off, and the sun comes directly into the side of your face. And he was like, how come there isn't a piece of eyewear that has the same coverage as a goggle? So he went back to his shop, took a goggle lens, got some coat hangers, and came up with eye shade. Basically invented the sport performance eyewear market, an entire category that had never been seen before. And this idea about reimagine everything. Don't go, well, I need to make a sunglass better. It was like reimagine what a sunglass could be. Reimagine what it means. Start with something new. And so this is why is this important? We'll get into this. This is an ad that came out, which I'll show in a little bit. It wasn't about where we've been. The origin stories are important because the past inspires the future. You can have these brands that have a rich history, but it's not about what you did or what you do now. It's what you're going to do to define your future and how do you build that. So the creeds, which are the beliefs, motivations, don't worry, I'm not going to go through the whole secret recipe, but these are the things that drive you. These are those things that we sit in a design review and go, how are we going to judge this beyond cool, sporty, metal, fast, things like that? These are the 9 creeds we use to go, how does this relate to those? And these give it more context. Everything in the world can and will become better. It's just a matter of when and by whom. Reimagine everything. Do what others are afraid to do what others can't do. Physics elevated to an art form. Satisfy the eye, the mind, and the heart, which is the way it looks, the way it works, the way it makes you feel. Deliver the unexpected. Design for the future, deliver to the present. If you always do what you always done, you always get what you always got. If you remove the logo, how do you know it's Oakley? My team's actually here in the audience, and they're like, I freaking hate those things. Because he always asks when we show him something like, how do these relate to these? It's like, God, he's going to make us answer these questions again. But basically we use it of, does the work embrace the ideologies? You should be able to say, it is Oakley because I did this that embraces one of these. And that's how we like to talk about it. The icons, what are those symbols? We're just talking about over the top today. I'm sure some of you kids see that now and it's like, oh, Y2K stuff. It's like, oh yeah, Oakley made that crazy wacky. But it was like, man, go back to those creeds. Do what others are afraid to do. Do what others can't do. Reimagine everything. If you remove the logo, how do you know it's Oakley? These are things that we look at when we start to talk about making those disruptive brand defining things. Look at all these things that I know all you young kids who are younger than I've been at Oakley are going, man, how do I get that old stuff? It's like, oh, but if we were just making stuff everyone else was making, no one would remember it. It wouldn't have its place in history. The lexicons, languages, visual and verbal. This is the tone of voice, the way you shoot it. Go back to my comment about, man, I want to hang those ads up on my wall. Are they distinctive or are they what everyone else does? So when you start to think about it, our product design, graphic design, storytelling, copy, how does it look distinct to Oakley? Whether that's just an ad, the tone of voice, those types of things. So what do we use to do it? Logic, purpose, distinctiveness. What's the storytelling behind it? Is there a logic? Oakley's a name, but it's named after a dog. It has meaning. It was the founder's dog. Purpose. Did we do it for a reason? Distinctive. Does it look different than anything else? So the example I like to use on this, I'll try and make this quick. I need a volunteer sucker in the audience who wants to participate. Is I got tasked with this of like, our founder was like, Brian, you got to draw an Oakley line. I'm like, what does that even mean? And so this is like, 90s things. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do flames, tribal. Maybe that's cool. I sat there for a week drawing like 900 different lines. And he's like, that's not it. And I'm like, I don't even know what the heck you're talking about. So finally I drew this one line that I was like, oh, he's like, that's it. And I was like, what the? And it was like this. And I'm like, I don't even know what you mean. But I learned what the logic and purpose distinctiveness is. So who's my sucker? Anyone want to volunteer? There you go. Look at this screen. Are the edges parallel? Yeah, you're going to get it wrong. Yeah, no, they're not. And you may go, yeah, they are. Look, they're parallel. But if you actually drew these all the way up, they're going to go to a vanishing point. So the logic was, he's like, parallel lines are not logical in real life because they don't exist. Parallel lines do not exist. So I years later, I finally figured out what he meant by this. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't you just say that? Make the lines taper and whatever. But this is where I was like, this is the fountain. Unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way because it was, I don't know when you see it, but he never explained it. But you see this in the lines, in the things we do. It was very distinctively Oakley. It was never about organic. It was about the logic of the lines and do the ends make sense and do they know where they go? Rituals, relationship with the brand. This should sound familiar. How many people are part of a loyalty program, get your Starbucks bucks or mileage or things like that? That's what rituals are. Is there a way you work your way up in the brand? Is there a relationship that goes on it? Those are positive brand touch points. How do you earn that connection over time? Rituals, I'm sure for those of you who probably go, Don remembers this, if you look at these things, it's like, you look at that glass on the left and it's like, oh yeah, I had those. But you know what? If you were an athlete, you never had the one that said Oakley on it. And like, no, I did. It's like, no, you didn't. Because you know what? To get that glass, you had to be an athlete. None of the inline product ever came with that sticker on it. That was very much like the Red Bull helmet, the Monster helmet, things like that. It was earned. You had to be an athlete. But what do you remember? Or what do you kids see when you look back at 80s stuff? It's like, no, all the glasses had that. It's like, we never sold a single glass that had that on there. You had to earn that sticker. Non-believers, this is the important one too. As I said, it's who we're not. How many people are actually working professional jobs already? Or this probably goes back to briefing now too, of like, we say a bad brief starts with a worse ending. But you probably think about like, in my position, I see briefs all the time. And usually when I see a brief that says, make it like the Ray-Ban one, make it like the Nike one, here's what such and such is doing, make it like this. I'm like, your brief is already wrong. Your brief should be, oh, we're losing market share in this, or here we see a white space like this, or here's where someone is gaining market share for like this. We need to compete with that. But if you're telling me in the brief to make that, you're going the wrong way. So those are the things to think about as you get these. These are what the non-believers are of what and who we're not. But at the end of the day, this is where my team hates this too, because we have this up in certain rooms, and I actually have posters of this, is like, I will do this. Be able to answer these 3 questions. And I use 3 questions a lot. Why is it Oakley? Why is it different from others? And why should the audience care? And that's what I challenge my team to talk objectively, because we are talking about subjective stuff. And as Nikki said, designers are always like, but this is my art piece. But if it doesn't work, how do you actually start to build that and do it right for the brand? So that takes us to where we are now. And this is, what do you do with an idea? Our boss goes, yeah, that's great and all. Finally, you did Secret Recipe. I've been waiting for you to do that. So don't pat yourself on the back because you were supposed to do that work. But how are you going to drive the brand forward? How are you going to align in everyone? And while that was a problem, I was like, man, I have an idea. And I went back in the origins and like understanding the past history of Oakley. So alignment. You guys probably see this. We talked about it. I talked about our matrix organization and alignment. You got all these people doing things. You guys probably have projects where you work on stuff with other people, and everyone wants to do something different. How are you going to align them? And the idea being, look at this ball of wound up thread. Is that how you want to work? No one wants to do that. But it's thread. Do you want to untangle it? How do you start from the beginning to align people? Because as a matrix organization like Luxottica, we got to be efficient, we got to be fast, but we have to do it in a brand right way. But there are machines that make this, can weave something, take all that yarn and do it as a system. And at the end of the day, you can make something beautiful with it, but you have to be aligned. How are you going to get everyone together with that? So we use the cinematic universe for this. And there's a reason why. Cinema is just IPs. Marvel, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Sex and the City, blah, blah, blah. We can name all the things. IP and entertainment is even bigger than it's ever been. And I'm sure we all watch things and go, yeah, oh, man, Star Wars has lost it. I watched the first ones, but, this is like getting whatever. And then you see something like Mandalorian or now Disney Plus has struggled with it. But it's like, why did Mandalorian take off? Because you had people who understood the story. Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni's like my idol, by the way. Because it's like, he didn't start from scratch and go, here's what I want the Star Wars universe to be. He knew the Star Wars universe so well. He's like, here's how the stories went. Let me bring it to life. And then you get J.J. Abrams comes in and it's like, no, I'm going to make my own movie. But you start to think about it, go, what happens when it goes off the rails? You're sitting there watching Game of Thrones and you're like, what the hell? Why is Captain America in there? You kids aren't old enough, but there's a thing us old people use called jumping the shark. And it was like, they're like going to gimmicks now to pull this off. But it's like, when you're true to that, how do you bring it to life? So when you actually think about a movie, there's a plot, there's an overarching story. That's the brand foundation. There's a script that goes with it when you write your narratives. How do you bring that to life? The mood and theme is the visual direction in a movie. That's your brand presentation. How do you show up? Character design, actors and the characters in the movie. Those are basically personas for your brand. What are the archetypes of them? Archetypes are used in movie making. Archetypes are used and personas are used in branding. Costume design, the wardrobe. For us, that's like, man, it's one-to-one. Does that apparel, does that eyewear look like it would be on a character in our movie? And it either does or it doesn't. The set designs, the scenes certainly show up, but then you talk about spatial design, environmental design, things like that. The cinematography, how does it capture? The visual centers, the marketing, do the posters look like it? Look at movie posters, ads. Do those feel like they go with the movie, or do they feel like they're disconnected? So how do you bring this to life? It's not about the ad, the website, all these little go-to-market things, the store, things like that. It's making sure everything feels like it comes from the same story. It's about why it exists for us at Oakley. We're using movie making as the vehicle, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But why? To create a vision, the way we want it to look, and that's the important part. I know data's great. We use a lot of data. We find insights and things like that. But to create your brand for the future, you got to think about the future. How do we bring that to life? What does the future look like? And that's when you look at those crazy over-the-top glasses. If you looked at what people were already making, we never would have made that. But that was about having a vision of what we wanted to make and what we wanted to look like. 20 years later, the world caught up to us. But you have to have that vision of what hasn't happened yet to set the brand up for the future, leveraging that past to bring it forward. So how many of you have actually seen this commercial before? Probably very limited. No Oakley people, raise your hand. There's a commercial that came out in '92 called Max Fearlight. This was a spot that was produced by us, directed by us, and really brought the brand to life. If you don't know this, I'm sure you guys all know what a red camera is, especially you students. You know, Jim Gennard, who's the founder of Oakley, actually went and started red cameras. That's why we have a very tight-knit with cinematography, things like that. But it set the tone and vision of the brand for the future for probably about 25 years, maybe even 30. But it basically created our Oakleyverse, as we like to talk about it. So I will play that now. So that commercial aired in 1992. No CGI, by the way. But people see that and they go, oh my God, did you guys just make that? It's like, no, that thing's like 30 years old, 32 years old. But basically it inspired an entire generation of Oakley and a whole era of it. And now when you talk about why is movie making important, does it feel like it comes from the movie? When you look at all the outputs of it, you look at ads. If you guys don't know this, that's actually our headquarters there. If you've never seen that, right here in Foothill Ranch, open to the public. If you ever want to come there, there's a lobby. You can buy stuff. This is actually our lobby back in the day. But you look at everything we did, it all felt like it came from that same movie. When it came to shooting the athletes, our logos, the products we made, did it feel like it came from the same story? But this isn't about the past, it's about the future. And so we started to think about, like, you can recreate movies. We all have seen reboots, things like that, comes back to life. But there's a couple ways you can approach it. Do you want to do a reboot of it, or do you want to continue a story? So we found it the perfect opportunity of, like, Max walks out there, the door closes. We're like, man, what happened after that door closed? There's probably a whole story we can write about it and define our future of where we want to go. So if you saw this, how many of you have seen this already? This came out in May, but this is starting to come to life. This picks up. This is chapter 1 that just came out in May, June. But basically, we are going to make a movie, roughly. But basically, what's going on here is there's going to be a new chapter every year, and it's going to have a narrative. And we use this as inspiration to set the mood and tone across everything in the brand. The comms, internally, the direction we're going on product, the visual language. But this is the one that came to life just this year. This is all CGI.
And he comes.
You're back. How is it out there?
It's getting worse. No one should be outside.
Max, I think you're seeing what you want to see. Max. It's not fair to Maxine. To both of them.
They deserve to be safe. In here. I'm building this for all of us.
Yeah, Dad, but I want to live
Do you remember how I found you?
I know you never wanted to let me in when
You were out there, on your quest, but you would have died without me. It's why I only leave when I have to, and no one comes in. I'm just protecting you.
What they deserve is a future. A future that's real.
a very dark and brooding trailer as you see it, but what's interesting is there's a lot of color at the end of that. When you see those sparks happening, there's something magical happening. And the way we talk about this is Oakley was very dystopian, very dark, brutalist architecture, things like that, super foreboding. There's a lot of things we like, and so when you talk about it, there's dystopia, which is survival. How do we get through all this? Then there's utopia, which this project, funny enough, was called Brave New World when it first started. But utopia is also somewhat dystopian, because if you know utopia, it's where everything's perfect. But usually what that means is it's someone idea of what is perfect. No one has an identity. You can't do what you want. And so what we talk about is protopia. And protopia is not made up by me. It's actually a term, look it up, coined by Kevin Kelly of Wired Magazine. If you want to look up Monica Bielskite, who writes a lot, white papers on protopia, it's about setting a vision of hope. And protopia isn't a single place like a dystopia or utopia. It's about the journey to make the world a better place. And so when we approach this in creating protopia, we're like, we started like, oh yeah, this is going to be a cool dystopian movie. And it's like, oh, well, that kind of sucks because we live dystopia every day now. You're talking about like, you know, countries getting invaded, pandemic, social unrest. It's like, man, we can't make a movie about dystopia. We live it. How do we set a vision of hope? And that's why the color at the end, the decisions to make, bring in the color and these sparks and things like that. We're like, oh, there's a chemical reaction of something good happening. Let's create that spark for the next thing of like something good's going to happen. And this is how we use it subjectively. When we first saw it, I was like, what the? Like they had shown that scene. I was like, yeah, it's fire and brimstone. Isn't it cool? And I was like, go back to the brief. Did it go back to the brief? The brief was to create something inspiring. You guys have painted a picture of like hell and brimstone coming down. Like cool, like you guys are really good at fire, but this is not inspiring. But this is how we would kind of use it. So basically you see Max is locked up in his bunker. Maxine's like, but Dad, I don't wanna. And Sasha, the mom's like, yeah, they deserve a world that's better. Get out there. So what you're gonna see is this journey, very similar to Art Imitates Life. There's gonna be Max old, like, why isn't it just the way it used to be? You're safe in here. Maxine's like, I wanna go out into the world. I wanna live my life, be who I am. How do I drive towards that? So they're pulled in separate directions. And as we said, it's going to open with that, you know, beginning of the chapter, but it's to inspire a new era of innovation at Oakley too. For those of you who've been to Oakley and you've gone through some of our archives, you're like, holy crap, this stuff is like crazy wacky. I mean, you think over the top's crazy? Man, you should see some of our archives. You're like, or the sketches, you'll be like, what? You guys were smoking stuff. But the problem back then is a lot of these ideas we couldn't make, physically could not make it. And could not even show it because we didn't even know how to show it. Even in CGI back then, we didn't have CGI. I had to paint that skull and crossbones thing. But then when you start to think about this, CGI where it is now, animation, Unreal Engine, all these things, we can put our stamp in being innovative and put things out there that no one saw coming, and we can actually share it now. As Oakley, we are trying to regain our stake as a leader of innovation and design and get back to that and show that when people see that over the top, it's like, what is that thing? People need to know it's Oakley. And the most important thing, Oakley's anniversary, 50-year anniversary. So all of you people who see me and think I've been there forever and they say, oh, you've been there since the start. I'm like, well, I'm 52, but I have not been there from the start. But next year is the 50-year anniversary of Oakley. And when we talk about this, is like, I challenge the teams at Oakley, which my team hates it. And there's a lot of Oakley people like, God, he's going to talk about the future again. Is like 50 years from now, do you want people talking about what we did 100 years ago? Or do you want people to talk about what you did in 2025? That's your job as being here as the brand, to craft the future Oakley, not to live in the past and bring those old things to life. It's to build the future and define it for us. So the final chapter, we'll see her, you know, she's going to step out of the bunker. And most importantly, as I said, this is about setting a vision of hope. This isn't about survival anymore and like, oh my God, the world's falling apart. It's falling apart in real life. It's like, actually, how do you set that vision of hope to move forward? And just so you show this, you know, this is actually some headings and chapters we have going on. This inspires our tech roadmap and our product technology roadmap too. We've actually built out stories all the way till 2030. What would the movie release in 2030 look like? What would it look like in 29? How do we use this to guide us, the decisions we make? And so basically, this is how we're creating our brand storytelling through brand fiction. speculative futures to start to think about what will the future look like, not just in 2030, but beyond that. So our ask to our employees and ambassadors, we use this as like, how does it fit into the Oakley story? How does that come to life? Are you part of our story? And if you're not, maybe you're not right for the brand. And if you think about, well, I haven't really seen this. If you've seen like Brain Dead, which we've released footwear with, it was been used for the past few years, even before this came out. We use it as inspiration in CMF. This is product that's actually in market now, that it's like the inspiration, you can see it directly tied to the color palette of the poster. Doesn't actually mean we ever talk about it that way, but you can see it coming to life. And this is the new lobby. This launched last year. You can see greenery, color, glass, wood. And it's not changing who we are of going away from our brutalist architecture, but it was bringing that vision of hope. Instead of this being a bunker where you shelter in place, let's make it a place where people can come together. And then as Brain Dead, this is how they brought it to life in their campaigns. And it always doesn't need to be CGI. You can see the campaign we did with Satisfy running here, where it's all real life. Yes, they photoshopped in that burning sun. But basically, it's like, it's used as inspiration. Does it feel like it comes from the world? Doesn't mean it needs to be Max Fearlight out running. So what is the future like? How do we use this? Because you guys know we're in the NFL, a bunch of sports like that, and people, I hear this all the time. So we have to shoot Patrick Mahomes in like Road Warrior gear out playing in the desert. I was like, no, it's like, take the things we have. How do you craft those things as, into something that looks like it would be a movie poster? Bring it to life. Doesn't mean we have to show guys running in spiked helmets and things like that. Justin Jefferson, Mutaz Barshim doing the high jump, Sage Erickson surfing. Does it feel like it would be the mood and tone of something that would be hanging in the background of Max Fearlight? So now here's how we talk about what it is not. I'm sure we all talk about, yeah, the brief says this, this, and this. One of the things I would encourage is actually doing a thing, what it is not. Don't focus on what it is, because you'll actually uncover more when you talk about what it is not. So it's a foundational tool. It's not a campaign. This was a long-term multi-journey. It's not about being a seasonal story. It's conceptual inspiration. It's not one-to-one reproduction. It's a home to showcase the DNA of the brand. It's not gratuitous product placement. That was the most important thing of like, not just throw like, oh, this is coming. Let's throw it in there. Let's throw it in there. What's selling? Throw it in there. It's meant to be combined with other foundational tools. Yes, we've got a vision, mission, purpose. I told you the secret recipe. You're supposed to use these tools together. Use all of them. Don't just think about, well, do I use the vision, mission, purpose, or do I actually use secret recipe? You're supposed to use all of them. That's why companies build brand foundations. And then it's ownership execution versus leadership direction. This is the most important one, because now I talk about this. I'm like, oh, well, you tell us what to do. I'm like, I'm not there to tell you what to do. I'm like the old guy in the room. You guys are supposed to figure out what to do. I'm just setting the mood and tone. And that's what we mean by ownership execution. This is done to empower our people to build the next 50 years of Oakley. Not for me to do it as being the brand soul. I just build the soul. You guys are supposed to execute it. So that's how we talk about it. And go back to my 3 questions. This is the thing. I told you I love 3 questions, which as my team hates, I always bring these up. Does it feel like it's part of the movie? Does it look like it? Does it sound like it? And the teams are asked to explain why. So I'll leave you with this parting story. How many of you know Bobby Hundreds? Few of you. Bobby Hundreds is one of the leaders of streetwear culture, not quite the grandfather. Bobby would hate me if I actually said he was the grandfather of it, godfather of it, because he's younger than Hiroshi and those guys. But we showed this to Bobby Dylan, 4 years ago, probably? And it was it wasn't at this, it was called Brave New World. And we showed him, it's like, here's how we're bringing it to life. We're making a movie. Bobby's like, oh, cool. But then we walked Bobby through it, and he goes, man, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I cannot tell you how many corporate presentations I sit through, and it's like, hey, here's our vision, mission, purpose. It's like our values. We're brave, we're authentic, we're innovative. And it's like, I see that from every company, and no one lives by it. It's a bunch of paper that you go, yeah, we're brave, authentic, innovative. Like, who's going to put down in their vision, mission, purpose? Well, actually, we're very cautious. We're slow to react. We're risk adverse. Let me come up when actually you start to do the work. Let me come up with all the reasons we're not going to do that. And he's like, I felt the most inspired now because you guys are setting this world that now, as me as a collaborator, I'm going away going, man, how do I fit into this world? And he came in at first going, yeah, what would I do? I love Oakley. And he'd been like banging down our door. He's like, but I don't know what to do. Like, and he's like, I expected a vision, mission, purpose thing. And he's like, now I feel like, man, how do I become part of this story? What would I do to make feel like Bobby Hundreds belongs in this story? And he was like, he was all excited. But we were like, we're doing the right thing. This is how we're going to bring the brand to life. Yes, we can have vision, mission, purpose. We can have our corporate documents. At the same time, it's not really inspiring. This is how we inspire people to do brand storytelling in the context of a movie. Brand fiction. Look up brand fiction. You'll see a lot of brands are doing this now. But that's the idea. And then being innovative with speculative futures. Also encourage you to guys look up speculative futures. It's using sci-fi as a design thinking tool to create the future. And that's how you can problem solve. Do things no one saw coming. Do things that don't even exist. Drive the world forward. Set that vision of protopia and a vision of hope of making something better than being stuck in, well, this is already done or this is what people are doing. Drive towards the future. Thank you.